This declaration of
Welcome to the second episode of Geopolitics with Alex. And with me today I have Dr. Fabrizio Tassinari, who is the Executive Director here at the School of Transnational Governance, the European University Institute in Florence. And today we'll be talking about the recent Italian elections, and we will be non-political. We will be looking at the geopolitical implications of the Italian elections. And as always, we're here two academics. Well, I'm a wannabe academic and Fabrizio is a true academic. We're a little bit reluctant to give you an immediate and instant analysis, but we'll give it a little bit of a stab and look at what the continuity of Italian geopolitics and foreign policy is. We'll look at Italy's relations to the European Union, probably to the Middle East, to Russia, Ukraine, the United States and China before we wrap it up. So warmly welcome, Fabrizio. Nice to have you.
Thanks, Alex. Always a pleasure.
Okay, so can you give me, a Scandinavian, a rundown on the election result in Italy? What happened? What are the facts?
Sure. So the first and obvious one is that there is a clear victor, which is the center-right coalition headed by a party called Brothers of Italy. And this party is actually tilting the coalition much more towards the right than it used to be in previous elections. The party also has two junior partners in the name of the League and the former Prime Minister Berlusconi's Forza Italia. The defeated coalition is on the center-left, but I would also say it is on a certain pro-European, technocratic way of doing governance and politics, which was most clearly embodied by Mario Draghi, who of course did not run for the election, but clearly that side has lost in this case. So we will see for sure change in this regard on a number of policy issues, and then perhaps also on foreign policy, but perhaps less so.
Okay, let's focus on the foreign policy side, because of course a lot of the discussion, the discourse has been about, extreme right, center right, and domestic policy. But really on the foreign policy side, can you run us through a little bit, say end of Cold War all the way up to Mario Draghi? What has Italian foreign policy been really about?
I would say continuity is really the key stance, irrespective of the many changes that have been in domestic politics. So in Italian foreign policy, you usually identify three pillars, and one is internationalism in the shape of rule-based organizations, United Nations, Bretton Woods organizations. Then there is a staunch, steadfast Atlantic element in the form of NATO support, as well as a strong bilateral relations with the United States. And then there is Europeanism in the shape of Italy being a founding member of the EU, a Euro member state. I would say over the past 30 years, the one pillar that has changed dramatically is the third one. On Europe, and Italy used to be a quintessentially pro-European country in the EU, and I would say over the past years this has changed quite noticeably.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. So let's focus on the EU side, because I always remember studying and watching and observing Italy, that the foundation and the pillar almost of its modern existence was based on a post-Mussolini world and on European integration. We had the Spinellis and the De Gasparis of
Treaty of Rome.
Treaty of Rome, and immediately Italy goes into the euro. I had the privilege to work with Romano Prodi when he was Commission President, with tremendous commissioners in the form of Mario Monti, and then of course head of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, who later became Prime Minister. So there's this sort of long tradition of Europe. Is this going to change? Because these guys are slightly Eurosceptic, no? Or what's your thinking?
Correct.
On this?
It's correct. The Euroscepticism that they embody goes way back. I think you can say It goes back perhaps at least to the first Berlusconi government. So you can say that there is a 3-decade preparation that in many respects was also pre-populist. I mean, they anticipated trends that then became very much mainstream. And then it has been swinging over the past 30 years because all the personalities that you mentioned actually ended up becoming prime ministers of various forms of coalition. But of course, the bottom line here is that especially over the past 30 years, EU policy has become much more than just foreign policy. So of course it starts to touch on issues such as immigration, economic policy, and now recovery from the pandemic. And then of course this Euroscepticism takes different connotation. Will it lead to the new coalition aligning itself or realigning Italy in more extreme positions, namely the governments such as Hungary or Poland? That remains to be seen. It could be that Italy, precisely for the reasons you mentioned, being a founding member, will be more pragmatic in its dealings with the EU, but there is certainly going to be a change on that front.
Yeah, because obviously the Prime Minister in waiting is actually quite close to Viktor Orban, and you don't know how they're going to react to rule of law issues and these. But if you look at what's going on in Europe, so we have obviously the war in Ukraine, we have Next Generation Europe, which is economically extremely important for Italy, and I think as a project, too big to fail, and Italy is the main sort of receiver of funds. So there are many different, but how about then if we move a little bit to one of the big issues of immigration? It's been a little bit on the back burner, but Italy, relations to the Middle East, North Africa, immigration, is this going to complicate things?
Yeah. Well, look, so this series is called Geopolitics, and I think if you want to speak it in geopolitical terms, the Mediterranean and all the southern flank is Italy's salient geopolitical environment. So clearly that is where Italy's own power is projected, but also its own vulnerabilities. And this is a constant. It's geography. You cannot change geography. Now, this has led over time Italy to always do business with most of the regimes that you would find on the southern flank, from Ben Ali to Gaddafi, from Mubarak to al-Sisi, for good and bad. And it has led, of course, to on particularly two issues, immigration and energy policy, to find somewhat not always very palatable compromises. So on immigration, you are going to see perhaps a repatriation of policy, namely Italy doing bilateral deals with countries, namely with Libya, as it has done in the past. In fact, in 2008, when Berlusconi made the first of the more controversial deals with Gaddafi's Libya, his slogan was, "We're going to have less immigrants and more oil," which was probably a prescient in respect to many other issues. And when it comes to energy, it's the other side of the coin, because Italy has been adamant to look for diversification of supplies, especially when it comes to gas. For example, in Algeria, Draghi has been doing relentless shuttle diplomacy to secure alternative sources. And so there is this power balance to be had in this region.
And I think it's interesting, I mean, for the Italian audience, or for, say, the Southern European audience, people understand how close Italian geopolitical relations to the region are, and to the southern flank as well, and the Mediterranean. But probably for Northerners, it feels a little bit distant. Yes. I remember when I was foreign minister at the same time with Franco Frattini, and he'd always be talking about, Libya this and Libya that, and North Africa. I was going, why is he on about that all the time? But you of course understand, and it does put, I think, Italy in a very interesting geopolitical situation. Linking to energy, we of course have a war on the borders of Europe and Ukraine. Italy has been a steadfast supporter of Ukraine. Is this going to change with the new prime minister?
That has been the $1 million question until I would say the election results, because it is indeed the case that the previous government has been very principled and proactive in supporting Ukraine. In the new coalition, there are, especially the two junior partners of the coalition, Salvini and Berlusconi, have been, to put it mildly, ambiguous on their support on Ukraine for historical reasons. They have had close ties with the Russian regime. So the big question has been and is to what extent and in which way they will influence the policy of the new government. Two factors here. The likely new prime minister and certainly victor of this election is Giorgia Meloni, and she has also been steadfast supporting Ukraine and Western policy. And the second is that she won a clear victory also within the coalition. Yeah. So she will have two junior partners who, relatively speaking, have performed rather poorly, and that will put her probably in a stronger position to pursue a continuous policy with the previous government.
Yeah, and I think this will probably give some continuity, and I would say street cred in the face of other European leaders, because Correct. If they can be sure that she covers Italy's back and says that we are with Ukraine, we are against Putin, I think this will help a lot. Of course, the problem there is, and having been in government with a populist party myself, is that the promises that will have been given on the domestic front, on energy prices, on price caps, etc., they might meet a harsh reality and a cold winter. So this will make a really interesting, I think, interplay on that. Now, let's move on from the Ukraine-Russia issue then to the final issue of today, and that's relations with China and the US. You began by saying that one of the three pillars of Italian foreign policy has been a strong transatlantic partnership and relationship, and that's certainly the case. Let's begin with that. Where do you see that going? Is she going to go and fly and see Biden next week, or what's going to happen here?
That's an interesting question. I would actually not venture to say which is going to be her first foreign trip. But I will say that clearly the US has been rather welcoming towards the new government. I think Secretary Blinken said yesterday, we look forward to working with the government, which sounds like a standard pleasantry, but in reality, it is really the result of very deep ties between these two countries. What I think it will be interesting to see, and this is really around the corner, is what will happen after the midterms in the United States, and of course with a view to the 2024 election. Let's not forget that, of course, the Italian government at the time also had very close ties to Donald Trump, who espouses a different US foreign policy than the current administration. So if this bilateral partnership will translate in a strong relation also with a potentially Republican majority in Congress or a potentially a Republican president in 2024, that again could spell change. But as far as the bilateral relation in itself, I think you can see some strong continuity going forward.
This actually reminds me, I remember flying to Italy a day after Donald Trump had been elected president of the United States, and I went in the cab and said, "So, what do you think about Donald Trump?" And the cab driver looked back at me, "Hey, we had Berlusconi for 20 years." So we were ahead of our curve. But, jokes aside, how about China then? Because this is, of course, Europe is in an interesting geopolitical situation here. You have the US, which kind of is looking to decouple with China. You have China, which is edgy and trying to find a balance, and Europe somewhere in between. What's Italy going to do here?
So, look, the premise in my view here is that Italy remains the second industrial power in the European Union. That means that Italy's relation with China has always been seen through this prism, which has to do with trade policy, dumping, and protectionism when needed. At the same time, and this is perhaps less analyzed than it should be, Italy used to be and effectively still is the first Western European country that signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative. So there is a strong relation that puts Italy a little bit in between. So I would align Italy's dilemmas here to Germany, perhaps, in that regard. But of course, the severe challenges that China itself is facing at the moment, from COVID to economic growth, will probably, place a little chip behind the ears of the new Prime Minister, wondering whether this balancing between China and the US, which is what Italy has effectively done over the past half a decade or so, should continue in the same way.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, I think today on the 27th of September, we get the figures from the World Bank on Chinese economic growth brought down to 2.8 from a predicted 4 to 5% from, many years of 6 to 10%. So that might change again. So let us sum up. Am I correct then in assuming that in geopolitical terms, we might see, or we probably continue to see a continuation of Italian foreign policy, and it might not be radically different?
Yes, I mean, I would put it in precisely the same terms. Domestically, let there be no mistake, there will be changes, perhaps also starting from the rhetoric, but also in policy, from immigration to indeed perhaps EU policy in the way we described it. At the same time, when it comes to broader foreign policy issues, ironically, I would see myself, I wouldn't call myself a realist, but in this regard, I do, to the extent that domestic change will not lead to foreign policy changes necessarily, rather more continuity.
With these words, I'd like to thank Fabrizio Tassinari for the conversation. I would like to thank you for following the second episode of Geopolitics with Alex. The final caveat again, we are only 2 days after the Italian elections. So if we got it right, thank Fabrizio. If we got it wrong, you can blame me. See you in the next episode.
America made its declaration of independence.